Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to today's webinar from the Pi News in partnership with Convera. I am Beth Kennedy, editor at the Pi, and it's great to have so many of you joining us from around the world. Now, one of the biggest issues we're hearing across the sector right now is the rapid escalation of cyber threats. From sophisticated phishing attacks targeting submissions teams to payment fraud schemes aimed at international students to vulnerabilities in how institutions store and manage sensitive data, the security landscape is becoming more complex and more risky by the day. Today's session will unpack what those risks really look like in 2025 and, crucially, what institutions can do to strengthen their digital defences. I'm delighted to be joined by two experts. Give us a wave when you hear your name. Today with us, we have Janet Burkhardt, Assistant Vice-Chancellor for the University Financial Services at the University of Denver, who brings deep experience in institutional fraud, compliance, and safeguarding student financial data. And we also have with us Alex Lawrence, Head of Content Strategy and Thought Leadership at Convera, who specialises in global payment ecosystems and emerging security threats affecting international transactions. Over the next hour, we'll explore how cyber threats are evolving, where institutions are most vulnerable, and the practical steps universities can take to build resilience, whether in admissions, finance, IT, international recruitment, or student services. But before we begin, a few points of housekeeping. You can ask a question or make a comment at any time during the chat. In fact, we encourage you to as much as possible. In the panel to your right, you'll see a chat button where you can pop in your comments, and just below that, you can see a tab to ask questions. Drop in your questions and comments there, and we'll get to those at the end of the discussion. And at the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to see a little green button to learn more about Convera. Simply click on that to learn more. And we also have Alex, who is in-house and will be able to answer any of your questions live as well. So thank you so much again for joining us. Let's get started. So Janet, I'm going to come to you first.
Sure.
What cyber threats are most hitting higher education today, and how are those changing? How could they adapt in the coming years, and what part does AI play in that?
Well, I'm seeing two things in our industry. One is that because the attempts are getting so much more sophisticated, both our staff and our students are very vulnerable to how good these fakes are. And so we do a lot of training here at the university to try and counteract that. But it's not unusual for my inbox to fill with messages, and I know that some students' account has been compromised. And so thankfully that stops at email, but still it clearly shows that a lot of people are still vulnerable. And the other thing that we're seeing, and I see a lot of this in the higher ed spaces that I'm in, a lot of the listservs that I'm on, those students are really hitting, that whole trend is really hitting universities hard. And many, many people are impacted by it, and a lot of universities are struggling to find these students and prevent them from doing damage.
But when we were preparing for this, you were mentioning about ghost students, and I was really fascinated by this. I wonder if you can elaborate a bit on that.
Sure. So what we have found is that there is at least the ring that we kind of discovered, there's a very sophisticated ring of people who steal identities and it's very interesting. It reaches mostly middle-aged people, so like 45 to 55 is generally who they target. And they will steal these people's identities, and then they will register, they will apply to a school, they will pass, they will put in all of their academic transcripts, and they're hesitant to give them to us, but they will say that they have transcripts, they give essays, application essays, and they're accepted. And then they apply for federal financial aid and get it. So they have these student accounts in our systems, and they get the financial aid, and then they get refund checks. And when we first discovered this in our system, I'm like, this can't be somebody just trying to get the refunds, because these students are actually getting grades. So what we have found is that in the era of online learning, a lot of people will sign on. They can use AI tools to do their assignments, and then they get grades. And so they look very, very legitimate. How we discovered the first one is the actual student person whose identity had gotten stolen was trying to, they saw on their credit that they had gotten a federal loan, and they're like, what is going on? So it's really difficult to find these students in the thousands of legitimate students that are and register and take classes every day at universities. And so it takes a lot of people in a lot of different offices a combined effort to try and find and expose these ghost students.
What happens to them when you do find them?
Well, it's very interesting because we can't trust any of the contact information in our system. So we can't contact the victims. But what we do is that we will definitely, if these students are registered, we will drop them out of their courses and we will turn them over to the Department of Education and say, these are fraudulent loans. And we prevent them from registering again. So unfortunately, a lot of the times it's after the fact, which is really, yeah.
But what can you do? I think that's the thing, isn't it? These attacks now are so sophisticated and becoming more so.
Sure. One of the things that we've done is that we're using AI to look through applications to see, are we seeing the same paragraph over and over and over again? Do all of these look the same? And then what we often find too is that when you actually take someone's application and you go to their LinkedIn, they don't match at all. So a lot of our online programs are doing that. And one of the things that we require from our faculty now is that the students have to turn on their cameras, right? Because then you can kind of verify an image. You might be able to, if we have a bit of suspicion, they can verify the image against anything else that we found. Those are the ways that we've done. The other things that we have done to try and find other victims in our system, we found that they were using term after term, they were using the same bank account, but just switching names. So now when we see the same bank account number used by more than one individual, we start looking in to see, is there a relationship? Because there could be mother and son at the school, spouses at the school, but if there's no relation, that's an immediate red flag.
That's so interesting. So it's really scary and really interesting. I want to come to next. So from a global payments perspective, where do you see the biggest emerging vulnerabilities for institutions working with international students?
Yeah, so as a cross-border B2B payments provider for tuitions and payments at universities and students, I would say one of the biggest shifts we at Convera are seeing is that fraud against universities is no longer sort of these one-off events. It's really industrialized, it's data-driven, especially on international payment flows. I mean, cross-border transactions still represent a real minority of overall volume, but in parts of the financial system, they account for the majority of card payment fraud by value. So the exposure is quite outsized compared with domestic activity for institutions that depend on international tuition and housing payments. When you zoom in on international students, the weak points tend to be at the edges of the journey rather than inside the finance system itself. So those include fake websites that mimic university brands, embedded payment pages or portals that look almost identical to the real thing these days, and scams where intermediaries or agents claim they can secure discounted tuition in exchange for paying them first. So organized groups are also misusing legitimate tuition channels as a way to move or launder funds, for example, by paying with stolen cards and then engineering refunds to different accounts or in different countries. And AI, of course, makes this all way more scalable. We talked about this in our recent report called The Payments Pulse, where deep fake videos and voice now sit really at the top of digital identity risk, and attacks are growing exponentially of this type, and they're increasingly being used to initiate or approve high value financial transactions. So Gen AI is a support mechanism to that. It's also driving a rapid rise in phishing quality and volume. Phishing is the sort of impersonation of another person. So students and staff are receiving very highly personalized, grammatically perfect messages that appear to come from the bursar or financial aid or recruitment teams. And this is often now reinforced by AI generated calls or video in this sort of fraudster ecosystem that they've created. And when you combine that with students paying from multiple countries with multiple different currencies, often under time pressure around visa and enrollment deadlines, really the potential for compromise rises rapidly if institutions don't have strong, consistent controls end to end and are relying too much on manual intervention. So, we're seeing more need for real solutions to action against these types of AI based fraud vectors.
So interesting, isn't it? And I suppose as well for international students, it may be that you wouldn't be communicating in your first language. And of course, that's another thing that we have to consider. The quality of that language is going to be incredibly high. been accepted into an institution. But equally, these people are at a very vulnerable stage. And if someone is getting in contact with you, telling you what you want to hear, you're probably going to believe them. Really, really scary stuff. So I've got a question for both of you at the moment. So I don't know who of you wants to go first. I can get you to fight it out afterwards. But where do you think institutions are most underestimating their risk?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in just because tails off of what I was already saying. I mean, a lot of universities still see fraud primarily as sort of just the IT department's problem or something the bank will catch on the back end. But I think that really underestimates both the scale and sophistication of what's actually happening. In our report, the data that we uncovered points to this turning point that we're at, where more than half of fraud attempts now involve some form of AI. And as I said, generative AI enabled scams have increased several 100% in just a few years. So that means attackers can iterate faster, can learn faster than traditional rule-based controls or annual policy reviews are able to keep up. So from our perspective as a payments provider, two blind spots really stand out. The first is around financial aid, scholarships, and remote enrollment, where, as Janet was talking about, those ghost students and synthetic identities can be created at scale using AI fabricated documents and deepfakes to pass those basic KYC or admissions checks. In the US and elsewhere, there's already sort of quite a few documented cases where bots and stolen identities have actually enrolled in online courses and financial aid, and therefore have crowded out genuine students from key classes. I would say the second big blind spot is outbound payments, refunds, agent commissions, research disbursements, or vendor payments sent across borders. That's where business email compromise, deepfake approvals, and those subtle bank detail changes can sort of quietly divert very large sums of money, especially if verification relies on email alone or that single person approval, which is a big point of failure still. I think the common thread between those two is trust. Universities are high trust environments built on collaboration, long-standing relationships, and criminals know that. They're explicitly weaponizing trust with voice cloning and deepfake meetings that appear to feature senior leaders, executives, highly credible people. These are designed to exploit the fact that there's many internal controls that still assume a recognizable face or voice or a logo. And I think that's where risk is really underestimated and where it's increased so dramatically in recent years.
Yeah, I'll jump in too. And I would say it is the trust thing because it is the nature of our community. If you think about it, we've got students who are anywhere from 17 when they begin to graduate students who are coming back who may not have been in an education setting for a long time. So we have a wide variety of people on campus who are just different on different paths in the technology spectrum, and some are more skeptical and some are others, and some are like, well, this came from the school, it must be legit. They don't really look to see about all the details of things that they're getting. And even the staff, sometime I had a staff member who got something that she thought was from HR, took a picture of a QR code on her phone, and then her phone was compromised. So it's just that level of trust is the who do you train, right? How do you pitch your training? And that's difficult because a 17-year-old is not going to sit through the same training that perhaps a staff member is who handles money. So it really is, it's hard to create tools to train people. And then in the outbound payments, that's part of my portfolio too. We have gone from like a dual verification from our staff members of email, a phone call, to actually having a third party registration source. And my staff will not make any changes. If a vendor calls or emails and says, I need to make a banking account, we send them right to that portal. And then that company verifies everything for us. And we have taken it, so we put it all back on the people that we're dealing with to do the maintenance on their own accounts. And we do that a lot with the students. My staff has no ability to enter or change direct deposit information for the students. The students have to go in there. Now, of course, if their credentials are compromised, we could have a one-off, but it's not something getting into our main system. So I think it's the nature kind of the community that we're part of.
It's kind of scary, isn't it? Because, we've all probably done, especially if we work in corporate places or institutions, we've probably all done the generic training and your eyes when you had to do it, oh God, not this again. But actually, it's becoming so sophisticated. So that the example that you gave, Janet, of the QR code, I think I could easily have fallen for that. And that's really scary. It's no longer in the wheelhouse of people who, ought to know better or whatever. I think it really is like it could happen to anyone, it feels like now.
Right. And you don't want to be, but I have found myself where I get something from someone I don't usually interact with in my day to day, and there's an attachment. I never open those. I will side channel, I will call, I will team somebody and said, just got an email from you with an attachment. Am I safe? Because I tend to think if one of their communication channels is compromised, maybe not all of them are. I'm a big proponent of making a phone call.
Yeah.
Which you can't always do.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've got a nice comment here from Cheryl Darrett Boychuk. Totally agree with Alex how fraud disproportionately occurs at the edges of the process / upstream. For example, at the proof of funding phase of due diligence during the application process. So this is definitely something that our listeners are hearing too. So if you have just joined us, I can see the numbers of you pouring in. Hello to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions that you would like to ask our experts here, please pop them in the chat. They will be here to answer any of your burning questions. But I'm certainly learning a lot, and we will get to solutions at some point during. Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. We will get to solutions, and it's going to be a wonderful, productive chat. But yes, please do let us know your thoughts and comments and questions in the chat, and we will get to those at the end. So, Janet, what does robust student data protection look like in 2025? What are the non-negotiables?
Well, some of them I mentioned just in the answer to my previous question. My non-negotiables are if someone calls and wants to make a change, my staff's first answer is, we can't do that for you, but let us show you the tools where you can do it for yourself. We also have we do rely a little bit on human interventions, but it is to check when anyone changes any type of accounting information in the system, we get a report the next day and we are looking at that. So, it's only as good as the people who are looking at it, but if you establish a pattern, your instinct is to say, wait a minute, something is going on. This person has changed, or I'm seeing accounts, and we can use AI so easily to say, are any of these accounts similar and what's going on there? So you just have to be really, really diligent in that. Those are both non-negotiables with me. If we have tools that can help us, we are using them. And if you don't use them, it's not a pleasant conversation that you and I are having across my desk. Some of the other things too is that if someone pays us with a credit card, we won't send them a check, right? That's part of natural rules, but you can't get sloppy about that. If somebody, whatever people send you the payment in, you have to refund with that same method, because you don't want to get into the business of someone sending you one way and then all of a sudden you're sending checks out the door and you're inadvertently helping someone launder money. It's early here.
Honestly, this is a very high level technicalities. How you're managing to do this so early is really, really fantastic. But I do find the AI thing so interesting, because so much of what we're hearing in terms of these deepfakes has been created with AI. Isn't it sort of ironic in a way that that's tools that you're using to fight it?
Right. It is, but it's a powerful tool in the hands of the good guys and in the hands of the bad guys.
No, yeah. Absolutely. Alex, anything to add to that? You're nodding along there.
Well, no, I just echo that. It goes both ways. Obviously, we have remarkably powerful solutions built upon ever-growing and ever more intelligent algorithms. And so you can only expect that AI fraud prevention is going to accelerate, hopefully faster than the speed of AI risk management and fraud. But we're seeing that, and it's a good thing, because the only thing that can keep up with AI is AI, in fact.
That's a great quote. I think we should put that on a t-shirt. Imagine in Silicon Valley, how popular those would be, would make a fortune. Alex, I'm going to come to you next. So how can institutions build more secure payment ecosystems, especially across multiple countries and currencies? This is where it gets really complicated, I imagine.
Yes. It's not a simple solution, but at a practical level, I would say building a more secure payment ecosystem starts with in payments, reducing fragmentation and opacity and going towards transparency. Many institutions still have, from what I understand, I'm not an expert, but still have one system for tuition, another for housing and fees, a separate for processing refunds. And it's this patchwork of tools for outbound payments to suppliers, agents, or staff overseas, And that fragmentation makes it really hard to see end-to-end patterns or consistently apply controls over currencies and jurisdictions. So what works best with Convera's education clients, from my understanding, a hub and spoke model where there's one secure API enabled payments platform at the center handling cross border collections and disbursements. And we handle them across 200 plus countries and territories, including over 140 currencies. So around that hub, you put clear rules to govern all of these areas, embedded payment pages that live on the university's domain. Multi-factor authentication is sort of a given. You have to have that for staff, configurable approval workflows for higher risk or higher value payments, and integrated sanctions is super crucial. And automated anti-money laundering, AML screening has to be part of every transaction. And this means the student experience is simple and more local. It feels more local. They're paying in their own currency through familiar methods, but the institution retains consistent, centralized oversight over the payment process and therefore auditability as well. I would say the other big enabler are data standards. This is very topical because there was a mass migration sort of finalized to this messaging standard called ISO 20022. The move to ISO 20022 payment messaging gives institutions and provides richer data sets for institutions, more structured payment data to work with, which means better address verification, remittance information, clearer purpose codes, more context around the parties involved. This is all very good for fraud prevention. That additional context is what allows AI-based monitoring to sort of move from the amount only rules to behavior aware detection, which is becoming much more frequent and possible with AI, where AI can sort of spot anomalies in real time across large networks instead of taking days when funds are already irretrievable. So for a university, the outcome is less false alarms, better detection of really genuinely suspicious behavior based on digital behavior, and less manual chasing down for information when something looks off. And now we're finally getting AI-based tools that can actually keep up with this type of threat. And ISO 20022, that new payment messaging standard that's rolled out across many financial institutions as of November, if not all, is really driving the speed of that change and the quality of the available data.
We've got a wonderful comment here from Jihani Chung. Agreed, ISO 20022 plus blockchain is the future. So we've got some comments. There you go. I actually would like to hear from our audience. So I'm keen to hear, is there anything that you're hearing here that you didn't know before, that you are surprised to hear about? I'm also quite curious to hear from if we've got any institutions who've joined us today, what your systems are and whether you're now thinking, oh gosh, really got to relook at those. We've got some practical advice here, which is all brilliant to see, and we can see the questions coming in as well, which is fantastic. So I'm going to go on to the next question, which is for both of you. So I'm going to come to Janet first. What role does staff training play in preventing breaches and fraud, and where are the biggest knowledge gaps?
Well, I think staff training is key because they're the keeper of very, very powerful credentials. I always worry. I think if my credentials get compromised, I have so much access into our system, it would be very dangerous. So it starts with how you manage your password vault, right? If I find a set of passwords under people's keyboards, that's a little chat in our office and probably a little chat with HR too, right? So, and it can't be, Alex said this earlier, it's not just an IT role anymore. IT, yes, they can do system-wide training, but it has to be part of every single staff meeting that you have. Even if you bring up incidents that have happened and said, okay, what could this person have done better? Right. And then the other thing is I look to partners. I don't know everything. I don't spend all my time in the fraud space. So I look to partners to come in and talk to my staff to give me cutting edge ideas, cutting edge tools, and say, here's something that we're seeing. Look at these trends. This is a trend right now. You might be thinking about trends that happened 5 years ago or even 1 year ago. And the bad actors have moved way beyond that. So your partners are really, really key to keeping your staff current in what's going on in the fraud space.
Super interesting. Alex, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the technology story that I've spoken about is only half the equation. The human layer is still there. It's still the first line of defense and often the easiest, unfortunately, point of failure because we are, after all, merely human. So we talked about how in our report how deep fakes and voice cloning have moved from proof of concept and now they're mainstream with attacks happening as frequently as every few minutes in some sectors. That means the old red flags of obvious sort of spelling errors or strange accents, and they're really they're not reliable indicators. And so staff training has to evolve from that general awareness to the more specific scenario based practice that can come with these threats. I would say the biggest knowledge gaps seen with education clients from the Convera POV are around verification discipline and escalation, actually. People are still understandably hesitant to challenge what appears to be a dean or a senior leader on a video call or an overseas partner emailing with an urgent request to change bank details for scholarship payments. I know this sort of scenario happens quite a bit, especially when messages really look and sound authentic, and they do. So I think training needs to focus on this. It needs to normalize friction, things like mandatory out of band verification, which uses a phone number from the HR or vendor system, not from the email, or dual approval for high value or cross border payments is really important. And documented what they call pause and escalate steps. Whenever someone feels pressured or something deviates from the usual pattern, should be part of a university's practice. And for maybe for frontline staff in admissions and recruitment and student accounts, there's also really a growing need to understand how AI scams target students directly through other things like fake housing offers or job opportunities. I get plenty of those through my channels. There's actually the money mule schemes as well. And fraudsters pose as immigration officials demanding urgent payments. There's a lot of scary stuff out there. So if those teams know what these scams look like, they can build warnings and guidance into everyday communication with international students. And that would turn student-facing roles into part of the security perimeter rather than being sort of an afterthought or someone who feels behind the curve. So I think that type of modern day thorough training of all these different new vectors is crucial these days.
Yeah, and I want to just dovetail a little bit on that. I think what really sets the tone for the wait a minute, I need to verify this comes from the departmental leaders. They have to have permission from their leaders to say, you pay attention to those internal controls. I don't care if it's the president, if it's the chancellor, if it's a board member. Our internal controls are our internal controls. And I say to my staff, if you follow those internal controls, I will always, always, always fight for you and tell whoever it was who wanted you to thwart those why you didn't. So I think leadership tone is so important when it comes to those kinds of things.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think the thing to remember as well is that the people, the scammers who are doing this, it is completely shameless. You know, we hear about the NHS in the UK, our healthcare system has had cyber attacks. People who do these kinds of schemes will stop at nothing. I mean, anything you can think of, as shameless as you can go, people absolutely will. So I think that's something as well for people to remember. So if you want to learn more about Convera, by the way, you can click on the little button, just for anyone who's just joined us, click on the little green button just at the bottom of your screen, pop in any questions or comments you have at the side. We do want to hear from you as well. So what are your experiences at your institution or at your company? Do you feel like you can be doing more to safeguard data and other really, really important stuff? So I'm going to move on to the next question. So Alex, how can technology providers help institutions stay ahead of attacks? Because that's crucial, isn't it? Especially as these are always evolving and becoming more sophisticated.
Yeah, we've touched on some of it already, but given how quickly all of this is accelerating AI fraud, it's really unrealistic to expect universities alone to build and maintain these cutting edge detection models, sanctions tooling, threat intelligence. So really, it's the role of a payment partner to aggregate intelligence across many institutions and millions or billions of transactions, such as Convera can do, and then apply advanced AI models to surface patterns that really individual campuses and universities could not be able to see from its own data alone. So this partnership is crucial. Industry-wide, AI and fraud detection is really a substantial and fast-growing market. Solutions helping financial institutions are cutting false positives by up to 40%, which is amazing, while still improving the detection of real threats. And that matters in higher education because it means you can tighten controls on international payments, more screening, more anomaly detection without drowning your own internal teams in all this noise or delaying legitimate tuition and supplier payments. So at Convera, that shows up as embedded sanctions and AML screening, machine learning based risk scoring of payments, continuous model tuning as inevitably these criminal typologies evolve. And it's all delivered through a platform that universities can integrate easily into their existing finance and student systems and tech stack. Another important contribution from providers is, of course, governance. Convera's own approach is we anchor our own approach in a responsible AI framework with explainable models, human in the loop oversight. So there's always some human interaction with the model to make sure that there's oversight and things are not going off on their own tangents, and ongoing monitoring for drifting data so that institutions can demonstrate to boards and regulators not just that they're using AI, but they're using it in a transparent and accountable way, which is crucial as these technologies are still nascent. So that blend of technology, global network intelligence, and governance support is what really, I think, helps universities stay one step ahead of these increasingly sophisticated cross-border attacks. So the payment partners are absolutely crucial in this scenario.
Janet, anything to add to that? I can see you nodding along
No,
there.
I mean, that's one of the things. And I said with training, that's and is one of the biggest things that I rely on my partners for is to do the work that they're seeing across their platform. Because I'm only seeing the interaction I have with them and my institution, but they can gather data from so many institutions and say, we're seeing this, be aware, right? Put something in place.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm quite interested as well. So I think quite often when people are having these conversations, especially if they're not that tech savvy, they can almost feel slightly turned off, perhaps, if they feel like the conversation is higher level than they want. And actually, it's so important that we all know as much about this as possible. So where can people find really easily digestible information where it's broken down, it's not scary, and crucially, you come away with the information that you need? Where would you put your staff in contact with, Janet?
I'm going to rely on my partners a lot. And I am going to caution my staff against going and using the web too much for research, right? Because just like there are deep fakes everywhere, I don't want them to get reliant and say, oh, I read that on the web, we're fine. But are we, right? So I have to turn to the experts. And a lot of times too, what I will do is I will talk to experts and perhaps then digest and find a way to get the knowledge out there in terms that my staff understand. Because just like I said, in the community, we're dealing with people who are 17 to whatever age of the spectrum. Staffs are like that too. You've got people that are coming fresh out of college. You have people that have been working in the same job for 25 years. And so you have to find a way to make it real for all those different generations, and they see technology very differently. So you almost have to kind of pre-digest for them and then put it in terms that make sense for where they are at the moment.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. And Janet, we're going to stick with you for the next question. So what do you think a resilient institution looks like? Are there governance or structural changes universities should consider?
Well, I do think governance is a big factor in keeping our systems safe. And I think too many people at the institution say, I'm too busy for this. Why do you have me talking about data? And I really think that a resilient institution really, really makes it understandable as to why these data systems that maybe people took for granted years ago. And there's a lot of my contemporaries in leadership positions who, remember when things were safe and nobody cared about our data. And you have to bring them along and say, the world has evolved and we need to also. So I really do think data governance. And I know, and we have an IT governance and structure in our university, and that's handled by IT. But we also have a data governance group that's managed by our institutional research, because they really work with all the data in the university. So a resilient institution has to do that. And a resilient institution always has to be looking to see what can we be doing better. We can't be relying on the tools that looked great and worked great for us in 1999. It's 2025. It's almost 2026. Oh my goodness. So we need to evolve, and we need to keep thinking about best of breed and what can we do? How can we evolve things in a safe manner, but still present things in a way that are easy for the students to digest? A resilient institution doesn't say, well, we've always done it this way and we're just fine with it. I hate that answer. If I say to people, how come you do it this way? Well, because we always have. Not a good answer anymore. It just isn't. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, and I think now's a good time to ask our institutions who've joined us if you're happy to share. So where do you think the risks are for your particular institution? And do you feel like your institution is doing enough to safeguard against these risks? I'd really, really love to hear from you. So please, if you have any thoughts, do pop those down in the chat. I feel like I'm picking on you a bit, Janet, but I do have another one for you. Sorry. So how can admissions, finance, IT, and recruitment teams work together more effectively on security?
Well, the first thing they have to do is communicate, because I've been in enough universities to see that in kingdom building at universities, and you have to just say, we're going to talk about this, and this is going to be serious, and we're going to meet frequently about this and really get things done. It's not, I hate to use a higher ed term, the time for navel gazing is over, right? You have to say, what are our strategies going to be, and create really distinct. We're very bad at mileposts in higher ed, especially when we have a lot of these, these different groups getting together. But we have to create mileposts that say, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and this is how it's going to impact the community. I think that's where you have to start with, is a problem statement that says, how is this negatively impacting, or could negatively impact, the people we're trying to serve? And then how are we going to work as a team to fix that, and to make it so it doesn't become a negative impact to our students and our staff. But students are why we're here, and we have to protect them. That's the big thing. There has to be open channels of communication, and you have to meet regularly.
The one big thing is keeping that dialogue open. I feel like that's been a recurring theme throughout this discussion. Mm-hmm. So definitely for people to keep in mind. So Alex, what are some quick wins universities can implement immediately that they might not already have thought of?
Yeah, well, I think the best way to stop that navel gazing that Janet mentioned is to go for these quick wins. And there are quick wins that can be implemented quickly, genuinely. And I think the first is lock down your payment entry points. You should be moving towards a single, clearly branded pathway for international tuition and fee payments, ideally using that embedded solution that we spoke about that sits on your own domains, so students never have to navigate a maze of redirections or third-party links, or spoofing is a lot easier. Make sure that official payment URLs and instructions are consistent across all channels, and explicitly communicate to students that the institution will never ask them to pay fees via personal accounts, gift cards, etc. This alone, as a step, can blunt the impact of fake websites and discounted tuition intermediaries. Second, tighten verification around any change to bank details or unusual payment behaviors. And that means callbacks to independently sourced numbers for vendors, agents, and partners. Dual approval, which I talked about for large or cross-border disbursements, should be a table stakes, and automated flags that flag changes to beneficiary information on accounts that are linked to those high value flows like tuition refunds or scholarship payments. Even simple rules such as no urgent same day changes to international bank details without a second approver or a phone verification. Those simple double step verifications can stop a lot of deepfake and email based attacks before the money moves. And then lastly, I would say you should run focused awareness sprints for staff and students on AI-driven threats. Talking about that education of the staff again, you should share those recent examples that we've spoken of about deepfake emails, and actually show the example itself of how the deepfake email or voice scam was convincing. Explain how those synthetic identities and ghost students are being used to defraud financial aid programs. give people sort of one clearly advertised escalation path when something feels off. And for international students in particular, short guidance on avoiding fake housing listings, bogus job offers, and those visa problem calls that demand immediate payment. That can prevent both personal losses and reputational damage to the institution just through education. And those are quick wins, they're easy wins, they're ones you can start tomorrow. And you combine that with the right technology partner, with the right actioning against the AI threats that are emerging, you can really materially reduce institutional exposure while sort of broader strategies and governance changes that we talked about start to take shape over time, over the long term.
But I'm interested as well, because you basically said trust your gut there. And I think that's a really interesting point to make, because I think so often people are scared about looking like they're making a fuss or they're being dramatic. So what would you recommend that people do if they have that gut feeling? Should they always trust it?
Well, it's better to be safe than sorry, and oftentimes your gut is trained enough and instinct to know that something is off. And so, with that intuitional knowledge that something feels off, something is out of the norm, I think the gut is a reliable sort of flag for a lot of the beginning stages of fraud, or the more obvious stages of fraud, or not so obvious stages of fraud. So I think trusting your gut should not be overlooked. And then you have different stages you can take thereafter to sort of verify whether your gut was correct or not.
Right. But your gut shouldn't be your only line of defense.
Definitely not. No.
Brilliant, brilliant. And actually, I just want at this stage, Alex, before we head over to audience questions, for those people who might just have hopped on the call, could you just explain a little bit about Convera and what you guys do?
Yeah, Convera is one of the largest global B2B cross-border payment providers. We serve over 200 and plus different countries and territories globally, with a really broad network, with sort of a compliance expertise in various markets. And we help our customers move money more smart, faster, and more transparently across borders. We're really proud of sort of the network we've built over the years. Our heritage comes from Western Union Business Solutions, and we are now sort of we're fully our own business. And we've been operating for now, I think, about 4 years, almost going on 4 years as an independent entity. If you want to learn more, visit convera.com. And I know I've mentioned our Payments Pulse report, which has a lot of these insights that I've gone over today, is available on our website as well. Actually, I'll drop the link in the chat so folks can check it out if they'd like to read the full report.
Thanks, Alex. That'd be great. I think that's going to be a helpful handbook for lots of people. And just to say as well, this is being recorded. We've had lots and lots of practical advice here. So you are able to go back and listen to this at your leisure. And why wouldn't you want to? We've got the best in the business here to talk you through everything. And so on that, I'm going to head over to audience questions. So how should institutions prioritize investment in cybersecurity when budgets are tight? Where do you get the highest impact first? Really, really good question. Who wants to take that?
Well, I would say the cost of not doing it outweighs the cost of everything else. So I would find the quick wins, right? I have talked about before, and some of it your own internal IT might be able to build for you. So the space on our web that we have to capture banking account information from our users, right? From our faculty, our staff, if they want to change payroll information, or our students, that was homegrown here, but it's something that you have to put in the hands of your users, because you don't want your staff doing that. Right. So, and then you layer on your multi-factor authentication on top of that. And I think most universities are going to that now, because we just have too much sensitive data in our systems. If you think about it, how many social security numbers or personal identifiers that all of you have in your databases. And then the other thing I would say, there's a lot of vendors out there on the other side who will do vendor management for you and do all of the basically the same things as you would be doing to capture information for your constituents. This is capturing information for your suppliers, so that you make sure that you trust the information that they've given you. And many of these providers provide indemnification to the institution, which is an added bonus. So if they verify that banking information is correct and it turns out not to be, then they indemnify you for that. So I really think searching out these partners who have a service that fairly easily integrates with your system and your own internal IT can do it, that would be the first place I would start. And staff training shouldn't cost much. It doesn't take much to take an hour of your staff's time and really, really impress upon them how critical they are in the link of putting the perimeter around the institution to keep data safe.
And how often are you doing that, Janet? Because I feel like things are changing so rapidly. You almost feel as though it would be very easy for training to not be able to keep up. So how often are you sitting down with your team and doing that training?
Well, I really do think that, especially for new people, it's the same message, right? It's because you can go and say, all right, we've talked about this before, but look, you all got these emails and another 4 accounts were compromised. That is a message that it's like they have to get sick of hearing it, and it has to become rote to them. And the only way for it to become rote is for them to hear it over and over and over again. And I try to have quarterly meetings with partners come in or internal audit come in, people who are more active in the space, to say, here's what we're seeing. So it really is, you have to keep it regular. And if you're not the expert in it, you have to bring experts in. And that's where your partners play a key role in this, because most of them, I know, Convera offers free training, so they will come in and do it. Your banking partner often will conduct free trainings for you. And so there's a lot of things that you can leverage without spending a lot of money.
Yeah, and I'll chime in just because I've heard this from colleagues. Advice I've heard is that senior leadership across functions should empower finance to make decisions about data security. Too often there's commercial considerations that take precedence over financial security, and some universities still put their own bank details on their website because their recruitment teams or academic teams have the last say, and that presents a huge risk. So I think the prioritization of empowering finance teams to make decisions about data security as a first stop is crucial.
Yeah, that astonishes me that it can just be out there,
Oh, yeah.
that information. Wow, is that common?
Yep.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy to me. On that note, how do institutions reassure students about data privacy without using fear-based messaging?
Well, I really think you have to rely on your communications team. I am not training someone who lives in the Marcom space, and you really need the people who know how to message in a way that's poignant and meaningful, but there's the wordsmiths. Look to your wordsmiths on campus. That's not me. My job is finance. Look to the people who are going to help you with that. The other thing I think is it really is an educational service to the students, right? You can say what we're trying to do is build skills that you can use not only here, but when you go out into the world and you get your first apartment, or, well, maybe not their first, it could be their third, because they move around a lot when they're in college. But when you get your first job and you're starting to get paychecks, and you're starting to move around in the world where maybe these scams are more targeted towards you. We're just building skills. So that's usually how I approach it with students. I try and make it a learning. There's always a teachable moment in this. And the other thing, at least with some of our messaging that we do, we have been very cognizant, and we only use text messages for emergency kind of announcements. We have not used it in the financial space, just so our students can tell the difference between those, which isn't necessarily data privacy, but it just builds a level of trust with the students in the university. So I think every interaction that you have with them has to build some trust, and then you can talk about data privacy in a way that's not scary.
Yeah, I do feel as though it's really teaching students from the very, very beginning, before they've even embarked on a career, most of them, the importance of this is only going to become more of an issue, more sophisticated, more things to think about. And I agree with you. I don't think it's about scaring people, but I think it's about gently impressing on them that this is a real risk. So we've touched on this a little bit before, but I think it's really important to reiterate what we've learned here. So we know that universities are working with multiple agents and pathway providers at any one time to recruit students in. So how can they evaluate third-party cyber risk when they're doing that?
Well, so I'm not exactly sure kind of the impetus of the question, but I know, like, if you're deciding, okay, if I'm going to be working with this agent, I'm going to work with a pathway provider that requires a contract. Every single IT related contract in our university gets reviewed by our IT department. That way they can evaluate if there's tools that that provider has that are adequate to address our specific needs within the university and meets our standards for cybersecurity. The other thing that we do is that we ask our partners to sign data protection agreements. Now, not to say that's not going to cause a breach, but they agree that they are going to do everything they can to keep our data safe. So in some respects, the attorneys have to get involved in this too. Don't forget the power that your legal team has when doing things like this. But you can't, I think, like Alex said, there's this proliferation of all these systems. You really need an IT governance structure that documents when a new system, a new partner is going to be leveraged at your university and where does it fit in your ecosystem. You really have to think about everything you're building in a very holistic way. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. And I think that's a really good point because it feels so often, I mean, so many people have told me who work at institutions that a lot of the time departments feel quite siloed. So it might be that you in finance only really deal with other people in finance, whereas actually, I think you're completely right. Having regular contact with people across the institution is vital. You're going to cover everything from all angles.
Right.
Yeah, very clear that the fragmentation among departments is a huge problem for evaluating risk and making sure that the risks are shared broadly. I'll mention another colleague has shared with me that at Convera, we partner with Ascent One, which provides up-to-date agent partner lists, and all of those agent partners are vetted regularly. So they have people on the ground to build a relationship with those agents that allows them to sniff out potential risks and build a relationship. I would say building a relationship with your agents or use someone who does is crucial to making sure agents are vetted and properly, the proper partner to be working with.
Absolutely. So I think before we start closing the conversation, I'd like to come to you each, maybe with your key takeaways from this conversation, and also what the one thing you think institutions can do to help protect them against cyber fraud. Big question. And also maybe jump to Janet, just a reminder there, we've got Alex has dropped in the link to the report there, so do check that out. That's going to be filled with gold mine of useful information.
Yeah, lots of good context there. And we go into also, I know one participant mentioned the importance of the new messaging standards around ISO 20022. And of course, blockchain-enabled payments, crypto-enabled payments, all of that is going to be touching every sector and industry, including education. So I encourage you to read the report to get some context on how those technologies sort of intertwine, particularly how AI payment systems and AI fraud detection will actually be quite supercharged by new payment rails. And so we need to consider all these new payment rails as a foundational part of all different industry payments in the coming 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Actually, can I throw a little wrench in your plan? I did see a really great question in the Q&A, if you don't mind. So if a breach does occur, what's the most important step institutions should take in the first 24 hours? Your first step should be to call your banking partner. I would say that is absolutely critical. Then I would call your risk department. Then I would call your IT department. So the best thing that an institution can do is create a critical incident management team. And what they do is they outline the steps of what has to happen, who the first phone call is made to, and that has to be documented. And every single person on campus needs to have a copy of that, regardless of what job they do. If they discover something, step 1, step 2, step 3, you have to have it codified in internal controls. So, and then your question to me was, what can we do? We have to have really, really strong internal controls, and we have to say to people, it's important you follow these no matter what the situation is, and have everyone be leery of every single email they get, which feels horrible, but that's the world we live in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alex, any takeaways from you?
I would absolutely echo that. It's all that we've talked about in terms of different levels of detection that start with intuition and go all the way down to working with the partner that you need to have the more sophisticated ability to analyze data and turn that data quickly around into actioning against these fast evolving fraud vectors that are now sitting atop an AI algorithm. So yeah, I mean, one of Convera's biggest risks is our clients being infiltrated. It's a huge interest to us that you don't become a victim of fraud. Do consider that when you're working with a payment partner, that we have this at the top of our mind and considerations set for how to support our customers. And those include the students in universities around the world who are going to be facing these new risks that are only going to intensify over the next decade. So yeah, I hope that the advice we've shared can help you get started with the right strategy to tackle fraud.
Well,
Absolutely.
I think this has just been such a fascinating conversation. I actually think it's very easy to be daunted by all of this. And as you said, Janet, nobody wants to be suspicious of every phone call, every text, every email that they get. But we all know the consequences of not trusting your gut or for being maybe a little bit too trusting in general. So I think that's a really, really important thing to remember. But also, I think Alex said it really, really well when he said that nothing can beat AI apart from AI. So maybe not to be scared. It seems like there's lots of fear mongering in the press about AI and its capabilities, but actually it can be our friend. So just to remember that. And also, I think that everyone who works in this space is working towards a common goal. Nobody wants to be the under threat of fraud or anything like that. So it's really important that we're all working together. And I think that message of cross collaboration is really, really important. I really round off by saying thank you so much to Alex and Janet for sharing their infinite wisdom and expertise with us. I've learned loads. I feel like I need to go up and brush up on my. So I will never again roll my eyes at a two-factor authentication message. No, never, never. It's very important.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of you who've tuned in. You will be able to watch this on repeat at your leisure. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for coming.